this video, you will see part 1 of the demonstration of a traditional technical architectural perspective rendering done with detailed penciling and watercolor. The idea is you can download the copy of my line drawing with the link in the description, print it out, and try out the process of this technical perspective drawing and rendering. So this is part 1 of the architectural rendering of this house I designed a few years ago. I divided this video into 2 parts because I wanted to emphasize the equal importance of the preparation and penciling of the illustration. Eventually, I will be posting the watercolor rendering process in part 2 a week later. If I have already posted it, you can click the upper right corner for a link for the watercolor rendering process. Penciling of the architectural rendering takes equal or even more time to establish before the actual watercolor application. This does not include the perspective plotting prior to the penciling, and this particular architectural perspective drawing was plotted entirely on an iPad Pro using the Procreate app. If you want to see a time lapse of that, you can watch that with the link here or down the description. The size of the printout is A4 or letter size, and I printed an extra copy to sketch the thumbnail shadow cast I wanted to implement. I do this thumbnail process for all my illustration to establish a good shadow volume and take note where the viewer's eyes would be led to. Where to place the contrast, like the darkest and the lightest areas of the illustration, is also something I would consider. And even testing placements of extra elements like cars, people, and plants and trees to help balance the picture. Once I have established the composition and shadow cast, I would start transferring the lines onto a 300 grams per square meter, 100% cotton cold press watercolor paper. The watercolor paper is 9" by 12" and I have secured it properly on a small drawing board with a 20mm 3M masking tape. Then I began smudging the back of the printout with 5B pencil lead shading, and with a tissue paper, smudging evenly until there's an even gray shade of pencil lead. Be careful of being not too dark or not too light or missing areas where the lines are. I securely taped the printout onto the watercolor paper. Using a straight edge rolling ruler, I use a sharp 4H pencil to transfer all the lines. When doing this, start transferring the volume or general shape of the architecture. Details would be last. Check from time to time to see if you are transferring all the lines properly. Take your time in checking to see if you miss any of the lines. It took me some 70 minutes of doing this, not in a hurried state. Once you are sure of the transferred lines, it is now to properly pencil with a sharp 4H pencil on the actual watercolor paper. I have sharpened the pencil point a few times during this process. The goal here is to have a good level of detail on the watercolor paper. Skipping this process will end with the transferred lines not being seen and lost details when watercolor paint is applied. So again, take as much time penciling everything correctly. Refer to the printout to replicate the details as closely as possible. Make sure edges are straight and are correct. If you make mistakes, recommended eraser is the kneadable type and not the hard erasers, or else you may damage the paper and ruin it for the watercolor process. Make sure the corners meet solidly. Plants and trees need not be so solidly drawn, and their edges cannot be so defined. As for the many louver elements for this house design, there are about 24 segment spaces, and I therefore subdivided the vertical spacing evenly. First, vertically divide into 2, then 4, then 8 equal segments. Then within those 8 vertical segments, subdivide into 3. Do this with the leftmost and the rightmost of the louver components. 8 times 3 equals 24 segments. Draw the horizontal slats of the louvers using these segment point references. It will not be perfect since there are lots of lines and the details are very small, but it will give your viewers enough impression of horizontal slats as cue for louvers. I know it is a tedious task, but when you get used to this method of subdividing for your perspective drawings, the skill is yours to keep. So the final penciling on the watercolor took another 70 minutes to finish. Take your time, again, in inspecting every line has been drawn and drawn properly, and at a certain level of detail. The process should not be hurried nor skipped, as the neglect of this process will endanger the success of the next step, which is the watercolor application. Be sure to watch that installment for the watercolor process. See you then.